When Super Typhoon Yolanda hit the central Philippines on the 8th of November 2013, it became the strongest ever recorded typhoon to make landfall. The Episcopal Church of the Philippines joined the nation in praying for those affected and offered emergency support and relief to the affected communities. Because of the massive scale of the destruction, the ECP encouraged the pledges of the worldwide Anglican Communion. The ECP crafted a relief and rehabilitation program that had two distinguishing features. Firstly, the installation of solar lighting systems, and secondly, the mobilization of food goods processed by its own communities. With the destruction of power lines, lighting became an urgent need. Not only was it required as protection against violence, but during the night, communities would relive the horrors of the deadly storm surge, from which lighting became a welcomed refuge. In some areas, generators were in use, but these required gas fuel which was in short supply, and therefore harnessing the abundant solar energy seemed like an appropriate solution. The ECP utilized this asset and installed solar-powered lighting in 12 of the major relief distribution centers. The second distinguishing feature was that the foodstuffs used in the relief packages were all produced by Episcopal communities. There have been many inspiring stories from communities all over the ECP as they stood in solidarity with their brothers and sisters in Leyte and Samar. For example, in Amtuagan, Tubo, Abra, the members of the Amtuagan Community Association soap-making enterprise manually transported their soap 1.5 hours because the road was impassable. In Licab, Santa Maria, the members of the Annunciation Cooperative, who had borrowed 115,000 pesos to rebuild their homes after Typhoon Santi, resolved to shorten their repayment period to make the funds available for a similar project in Leyte and Samar. In Basao Mountain Province, it was observed that the women camote processors were being assisted by their husbands, who would usually relax and drink liquor after work. Upon hearing that the products were intended for the survivors of Super Typhoon Yolanda, the husbands began contributing to the camote processing operation. In Ka-Anglan, San Jose, Nueva Ecija, an Episcopal Church woman noticed a rice truck on its way to Manila. When she learnt that the rice was intended for Yolanda relief, she asked the driver to wait while she went to her house to get 1 sack of rice to donate to the load. She said that she had experienced devastation from a previous typhoon and wanted to contribute. The second stage of the work of the ECP involved partnering families and communities in the long-term rehabilitation of the area. This occurred just as the Episcopal Care Foundation launched its revisioned program anchored in the asset-based community development approach and the receivers to givers policy. Under this policy, communities would no longer just receive financial grants. Instead, all fund support would be expected to be granted back or passed on to other groups or communities for similar development ventures. eCare was faced with a dilemma. It seemed insensitive to talk about ABCD and the receivers to givers policy in communities where their livelihoods were almost completely wiped out. And it was even harder in communities where there seemed to be an unlimited offer of grants from various national and international relief agencies. There was a strong inclination to exempt the disaster-affected areas from the new development approach. However, upon reflection, it was clear that eCare could no longer go back to a situation where it supported grant-based projects that often deepened the sense of helplessness and dependency within a community. The first program proposed under this new structure was the housing project in Ormoc City. One of the largest challenges facing this project was that most of the participating households were tenant farmers, and as such they did not own their own land to be able to construct resilient, permanent housing. As it was not desirable simply to rebuild the temporary structures, the ECP began looking for a relocation site. A member of the Sabangbao Barangay Council offered 1 hectare of farmland that could accommodate 70 to 80 households. The plan was for participating families to be awarded a parcel of land and for them to pay back the value over time, with the funds then going to another set of households who also required relocation. The enthusiasm that came from the opportunity to own land meant that partner families were willing to take on extra jobs in order to raise the payment in the shortest possible time. In fact, even before the groundbreaking of the project, the households had given back 40% of the cost of the land. The receivers to givers policy was also discussed in relation to livelihood support. Barangay Cabaloran in Dagami Leyte received a livelihood support fund of 600,000 pesos, which it paid back a month before its specified deadline due to the huge demand for fund support for the rehabilitation of farmlands. The community continued to engage in cycles of the project. These projects followed e-care best practice. The continuing cycles of receiving and giving back encouraged a strong relationship between the community and the Episcopal Care Foundation. It also advocates good financial management that will ultimately enable the community to become financially self-reliant. When an event like Super Typhoon Yolanda occurs, it is easy to see the damage and the darkness. But the partnerships between Yolanda survivors, the Episcopal Care Foundation, the ECP and global congregations have become a beautiful beacon of light. They demonstrate the strength and courage that it takes to stand up again, stronger than ever before. And they remind us that when we work together with hope and unity, that nothing is impossible.